Welcome back, everybody, to the KC Sports Report. Michael Darcy, your host here as always. And today I'm going to break down if the Kansas City Chiefs are going to cut ties with wide receiver Rashee Rice. As you are all well aware by now, he got into a street racing incident down in Dallas, Texas earlier this weekend. And it left most Chiefs fans in the dark for about a 24-hour period where we didn't know the state of where Rashee Rice was, whether he was going to retain his contract with the Chiefs, or even if he was okay. So in this video, I'm going to go over the timeline of events, kind of explain what happened to the best of my ability, and also talk about whether or not he is going to be a member of the Kansas City Chiefs next season. So, like I said, there was about a 12 to 24-hour period where we had absolutely no clue what was going on with Rashee Rice. At about 6 p.m. on Saturday, there was a street racing incident, allegedly at the time involving Rashee Rice and a couple other friends, and it involved two cars, a Lamborghini and a Corvette. The Corvette, we found out, was owned by Rashee Rice, and the Lamborghini turned out to be rented. But the kicker that we've learned after about 2 days later is that Rashee Rice was not driving the car. He was in the passenger seat of, I believe it was the Corvette, which he did own, but the Lamborghini was rented. And you can kind of see TMZ footage of him exiting, there's dash cam footage of him exiting the car and kind of fleeing the scene, which we did not have at the time because I was on Twitter around, I want to say 2 a.m. on Easter, looking at what was going on, and we were all left in the dark because all we heard was that there was a car that was owned by Rashee Rice on the Dallas freeway, and it was empty. So it seemed like at the time that Rashee Rice committed a hit and run and fled the scene. And so it left, Chiefs fans thinking the absolute worst, like, was he drunk? Did he get hurt? Did he, cause this accident himself? And while he kind of sort of admitted to being a part of this 6-car crash, he wasn't the one that was driving the car. Does that make it better or worse? I mean, it's better than him driving the car, but at the same time, he is just as responsible for what happened. And I think that, since he is the biggest name that is coming out of this story, he's going to get the majority of the blame. He rented the Lamborghini, even though he wasn't driving it. His name was on the renter's insurance that he had to rent the car for. His name was on the Lamborghini, which he owned, and so Rashee Rice is the common denominator when you look at who's at fault right now. Granted, we're still kind of in the dark about what actually happened. After what we saw from the dash cam footage and the TMZ photos that came out, people were still trying to discover if that was actually Rashee Rice. There was a lot of speculation as to whether it was or not, and based on, the clothes that he was wearing and a similar bracelet that he's worn in some different Instagram photos, Rashee Rice was on the scene and fled the scene with about 2 or 3 other people. But again, was he driving the car? Was he not driving the car? Does it make a difference? Was there alcohol involved? We don't know. We know that he wasn't driving the car, but for the first, I want to say 12 to 16 hours, we didn't know what was going on. And a couple days ago, we got a statement from Rashee Rice's attorneys saying, on behalf of Rashee Rice, his thoughts are with everyone impacted by the automobile accident on Saturday. Rashee is cooperating with local authorities and will take all necessary steps to address this situation responsibly. Any and all requests for comment can be directed to his attorney, Mr. Royce West of West & Associates, LLP. So clearly, they don't want Rashee Rice talking about this situation, and for good reason. He's not going to say anything that is going to help him in a court of law. But essentially what I gather happened is that he was involved in this street racing on the Dallas highway. He wasn't driving, but the car that he owned and the car that he rented were at fault. And whether or not he was driving can still put him in just as much trouble in a court of law because, again, his name was on the renter's insurance of the Lamborghini that he rented. So that is going to place him in an interesting position, but the big distinction is that he wasn't driving the car. And that might have just saved his roster spot on the Kansas City Chiefs. There's a good chance that if he was driving and, who knows, maybe, if he was driving and he was responsible for, the 6-car accident that nobody, perished from, but there was still some injuries. And again, it's just irresponsible. That might have been the end of Rashee Rice's time in Kansas City. I don't think that's going to be the case. Honestly, the first reaction by a lot of people was comparing this accident specifically to what happened a couple years ago with Henry Ruggs. I think that's a pretty bad comparison because Henry Ruggs was speeding. I believe he was under the influence of alcohol, and he also killed somebody. So we kind of have to, make sure that we are comparing two things that are of equal damage. And while what Rashee Rice did was irresponsible, it's not as bad as what Henry Ruggs did a couple years ago. And that's an important distinction because, again, the fact that Rashee Rice was not driving the car is big. And it's going to go big in terms of what the team decides to do with him. But will he be suspended? I think that's a good question because we've seen a lot of guys in the NFL get suspended for a lot less. And while he wasn't necessarily driving the car or wasn't under the influence of anything that we know of, since he was in the passenger seat and both of the vehicles that were in the car accident were under his name, one he owned, one he rented, he is going to get suspended by the NFL. And the Chiefs might try to get out in front of it and suspend him first so the NFL can't do it. Or if the NFL does it, it's going to be a lighter sentencing. I don't think that he gets like 6 games. I think he'd probably get around 3 or 4. But the reason that he would still get suspended, even though he wasn't driving the car, is because this kind of conduct is seen as detrimental to the NFL and their brand. And so they have, I believe, the right to suspend him for violating probably their conduct and personal policy, which if the worst that comes out of this situation is Rashee Rice getting suspended for 4 games, that's a net positive for the Chiefs because after seeing, what happened initially and the cloud of smoke that was around the incident and what we didn't know at the time, my immediate thought was, oh, he's driving the car. Oh, he's responsible for this. He fled the scene. This is an O.J. Mayo situation, O.J. Simpson situation all over again. And luckily, that's not the case. And so he's probably going to be suspended a couple games by the NFL. And I don't think he loses a roster spot. And I don't think that's necessarily, I don't think that's controversial because I think that, again, he wasn't driving the car. He owned the cars, and what he was doing was incredibly irresponsible. But again, we've seen some guys in the NFL do a lot worse and get away with it. And, while this may have been, on a bigger stage and a bigger platform because he is a wide receiver for, a back-to-back Super Bowl champion and one of the NFL's biggest brands. So for that reason, they could try to come a little extra harder down on him to set an example. But with that being said, he's also a wide receiver on the NFL's biggest brand, so they're not going to want to keep him off the field for too long. So I don't think that he gets cut by the Chiefs. I do think he gets suspended unless anything major in this case breaks where we find out that, he was in the driver's seat and he switched with his buddy at the last second. That would be insane. But I don't think that's the case because the airbag's deployed. And for them to do that, they got out of that car pretty quickly if you watch the dash cam footage. So, that's my thoughts on the Rashee Rice incident. And while a lot of people out there think that this situation was, incredibly irresponsible and detrimental to the team, I'm not going to say you're wrong, but at the same time, I don't think that he gets cut. I think this is probably a situation where he gets off with a slap on the wrist. And I'm not really here to say whether that's right or wrong, but I do think that he probably doesn't get the punishment that a lot of people think he deserves. So with that being said, guys, thank you for watching this video, and go Chiefs.